My guest today is multi-award winning producer, director, and series producer Francis Whately, who has over 30 years experience in high-end and award-winning documentaries for major TV broadcasters on both sides of the Atlantic, including the BBC, HBO, and even Netflix and A&E, Showtime, Discovery, and even PBS. But his hugely diverse range of films covers music and the arts, history, current affairs, even sports, science, and business. Now, some of his highlights include the award-winning and highly acclaimed feature trilogy, David Bowie, 5 Years, Power, and the World's Women with Hillary Clinton, and the feature-length Dolly Parton, Here I Am, as well as Glastonbury at 50, the drama documentary series, His Most Intimate Betrayal, about the spy, Kim Philby, and Andrew Marr's multi-award-winning History of Britain and History of Modern Britain. Now, Francis has also interviewed and worked with, among others, Billie Eilish and Dame Judi Dench, Twiggy, His Royal Highness the late Duke of Edinburgh, and Dolly Parton, Kate Moss, even David Bowie, and Chris Martin, to name a few. So, ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome award-winning documentary filmmaker Francis Whately to the show. Welcome, Francis.
Thank you very much for having me. That's it doesn't sound like me, any of that, but thank you.
Well, you have such a very long, very impressive resume when it comes to multiple documentary film productions, and again for a huge array of broadcasters from around the world. When did you get interested in film?
That's a very good question. I didn't really watch TV when I was growing up very much. I watched a few things, but yeah, I wasn't one of those kids who just sat watching TV all day. And I never thought of a career in television at all. It never occurred to me. I thought I was going to work in the art world, which is what I did for a few years. I worked as a Chinese porcelain sort of expert in Hong Kong at Sotheby's and Christie's before handover, before 1997. But I think I found the sort of commercial aspect of the art world a little depressing, maybe. So I thought, what can I do with my sort of art background that doesn't involve commerce? And so someone said, well, why don't you join the BBC? Which I didn't really know very much about. I'd passed it on the big motorway, but I didn't really know much about it. I obviously knew the BBC and watched the BBC, but I didn't really know what people did there. But then I was sort of tutored through it. And to cut a very long story short, I was given a job eventually as a clerk, which is such a lowly position. They don't even have them anymore. I guess you'd call it a runner now, but I was a clerk and I ordered stationery. I was the stationery king, and for the whole department. And at that time in the BBC, the arts department was massive, absolutely massive. We put out an amazing amount of hours every week in the art and culture and music sphere that we just don't do anymore. It's just all that has sort of gone, I'm afraid. But in those days, there was a lot to choose from.
Well, what led you into the world of documentary filmmaking, especially with some of the biggest musical icons of our time?
Again, it was sort of, I sound like something out of Withnail and I, we've gone on holiday by accident. It was slightly by accident. I had one of my first jobs as a director, I was given 10 little 2-minute films before a famous news program called Newsnight, which is a really serious, hard-hitting news program. And they used to have 2-minute films just before that about an exhibition that was happening in England somewhere, or something that was happening in the cultural sphere. So in the old days, it used to be really amazing because you get postmen and butchers and gardeners and normal people talking about a piece of art. And it was really amusing. But this was the 90s, and we'd already become a slightly more celebrity-driven culture. So they said I was allowed 5 normal people and 5 celebrities. So the normal people were fine. But then I thought, who am I going to get as a celebrity? and it was on. My subject was modern British sculpture, and you kind of think, does anyone care? Is anyone interested in this? And then I thought, okay, well, I'd grown up as a fan of David Bowie. I was green and naive, and no one could believe that I would do it. So I wrote to David Bowie, thinking, okay, well, he at the moment was writing at that time was writing for a magazine called Modern Painters. So I knew he was interested in art. I knew he had a big collection. So I thought, oh, what the hell? So I just thought, okay. So I wrote him a letter, an old-fashioned letter, which got to him. And the next week he phoned me and said, yeah, I'd love to do this. And it's just somehow, the world has changed to such a degree. You can't imagine me now doing it to Taylor Swift or Beyonce or almost anyone, actually, that actually they would reply. But he did. And it was kind of amazing. So he did this, and it was a very short piece. And it was about a piece of sculpture called Sacred, and it was in a wood. Anyway, so it was 2 minutes, and he seemed very pleased with this thing, and he put one of his tracks on it, and he talked in a very mystical way about this piece of stone in a wood, which he'd been to visit apparently with his wife in Marr, and they both really liked this slab of stone. And then we sort of got talking, and I think because I didn't tell him for a very long time that I was in any way a fan, we talked about art and literature. And I think he presumably, found it quite refreshing that someone would talk to him about anything other than music. And instead of asking him, why did you kill off Ziggy? We were talking about literature. And he found that, I think, quite refreshing, maybe. So then we did a film again together, and he narrated a film that I made about Stanley Spencer, the artist, who was a eccentric artist in the sort of 1920s, 1930s and on. And again, at that time, he would call quite a lot to talk about art and books. And so we became, I hesitate to say friends, because he certainly never invited me to Mustique. Or anything like that. And, it was quite secret. I don't think he told anyone that he had this sort of pen pal relationship with me, maybe. But then I was going to do, he said, well, what can we do together? And we came up with this idea of a 4-part series on the history of the 20th century in terms of British art. And yeah, it didn't happen for reasons not to do with him and not to do with me, but to do with financing and that sort of thing. And it was a huge shame, but we stayed in touch, and we stayed in touch to the very end. So in answer to your question, I didn't really know what I wanted to do at the BBC. I knew I was in the right department, but I think it was that little piece with him. And I thought, okay, well, I can do something like that. And, my idol thinks I'm okay, so maybe I can do something. So it was really just that, and it was just very lucky.
Well,
Very lucky.
it only takes one.
Yeah.
And you're right. Back in that time, people still wrote letters.
Yeah.
If you were a fan of someone and wrote them a personal letter, there was a 50-50 chance that they would actually get that letter and probably read it. Nowadays, there is no snowball's chance in hell anybody's going to get a letter to anybody that's famous. And you have to go through 3 channels of publicists and agents and managers just to think if you're even going to get close to them. And the only person that's going to tell you yes is not the artist. It's going to be the chain of command. And you know that by now.
Yeah, I certainly do. Yeah, it's got a lot harder from that front. It's all PR now. I often think of this, because I think of the film that Alan Yentob made about David Bowie, which was called Cracked Actor, and it had David in the back of a limousine, coked out of his head, talking about there being a fly in his milk. For anyone who hasn't seen it, watch Cracked Actor. It's amazing. And you kind of think no one would ever allow that to be filmed now or to be released in any form. And I think David Bowie thought at the time and thought later, this is authentic. And we've moved away from any sense of authenticity in artists to aesthetic, where now it's all about how you look rather than you being your real self. And it's all about facade.
It is. And you know, and the biggest reason I believe behind all that now is that social media has
Mhm.
created this whole fake world that
Yeah,
even celebrity, and you know this firsthand, celebrities have paparazzi on speed dial.
yeah,
They tell them where they're going to be. They pretend that, oh, I'm surprised that you're here. And
yeah,
then just to get multiple shots, just so they stay in the media on a daily basis. But then all of the shots are most likely doctored and everything's always positive, nothing's
yeah.
negative. And I wish we could kind of go back to the days where, I mean, think about it in New York. I mean, could you imagine if in the back of the days of Studio 54, if cell phones
Yeah.
existed?
It would have, yeah, it would have been the death. It would have closed down within a day. It would have closed down within a day. Yeah. I mean, the things that went on in that place. Yeah.
Yeah, and to see all of that plastered across Instagram and Facebook and Daily Mail, yeah, I think today every one of those careers would have died.
Oh, completely. Oh, completely. Yeah. I mean, yeah. I'm so glad that we don't know what went on in there. Really, you get
Yeah,
snippets of what went on, but yeah, there was a basement. Apparently, that's all we need to say.
that's it. And now for you, you created music documentaries on some of the most famous recording artists from the past few decades. Of course, David Bowie, of course, Dolly Parton, but then you had documentaries of the music moguls behind the scenes. You had icons like Andy Warhol, which probably just was your wheelhouse in the areas of art. Then you had
Yeah.
Judi Dench and even Hillary Clinton. Those are all some very heavy hitters. How do you go about choosing your subject?
I'd love to say, I have all these people on speed dial. I don't. I don't have anything like that. I work for the BBC, and the BBC is, it was, and I think still is to some degree, perhaps a little less than it was, but it had clout. And if you sent an email or sent a letter on BBC headed paper, it tended to get noticed. And so we had enough commissions at that time that if you were, I think, any good at all, you did have some choice in the sort of projects you could do. So normally it wasn't me coming up. Sometimes it was, but it wasn't normally me coming up with an idea and saying, let's make this. I know Hillary Clinton. They would approach you, and so with that one, it was Hillary Clinton and Condoleezza Rice and Madeleine Albright about the worst violations against the world's women. And again, I think things have changed so much that there was not a chance in hell again of me as a man being able to make a film about that subject. And possibly rightly. But I think it was the thing I'm most proud of, actually, because it was about Hillary Clinton's 1998 speech of women's rights are human rights and human rights are women's rights. And it was looking at whether anything had changed. This was before she went for the nomination to be the Democratic leader. Um, and it was a fascinating thing. But yes, it came out of current affairs, and the BBC had clout, so they could get those sort of people. It was really that simple at that time. So again, I worked on a series called Soul Deep, which was one of the first music things I did, and it was from sort of Ray Charles to Destiny's Child. And again, those people, it was very easy to get them in those times, and you just couldn't do it now. You just couldn't do it.
Well, that leads to my next question. And because you bring up some very important points here, when we look back to, let's say, the mid to late 90s, and now we're in modern day,
Yeah.
my favorite documentaries to watch are those of recording artists because there seems to be endless stories.
Yeah.
For you, when you are documenting someone's life, how do you balance their professional life and their personal life? I mean, if you use David Bowie or Dolly Parton as an example, because back in the day, they'd probably just say, hey, here it is, and this is me, and just do whatever. Today, it won't be that way.
Again, I was very lucky, and I think it comes down to trust, I guess. That David Bowie had known me not as a friend, as I say, but had known me and known my work, and I'd sent a lot of my films to him, um, including the one about Hillary Clinton, etc. To which he replied, he sent me. He often would critique my work, which was great, and he said, "I feel about your film with Hillary Clinton, Condoleezza Rice, and about these appalling things happening to women." He said, I feel about this as I do about Lou Reed. Very worthy, but very hard work. And I thought that was great. I thought that was great.
Yeah.
But it was a matter of trust. And Bowie asked me, because the first film I made was called 5 Years, and he was already a recluse by that time. So although he helped me a bit from behind the scenes, he didn't appear on camera. Um, and he asked me just before transmission, he said, well, Francis, can I see the film? And I said, of course not. There's no question of it. This is the BBC. That's not how we work. And he just wrote back, lol. And I thought that was very, very amusing. And I said, but what I'll do is I'll send you a copy of the film and you'll get it in New York exactly the time it comes out in the UK. And he said, deal. And he wrote to me the second it finished, to say how proud he was of me. And that, for someone who was, a childhood fan, that was a very good moment. But what I'm saying is that there has to be trust, because otherwise what we're making is PR, and we're just branding these artists. So again, with Dolly Parton, she didn't have any editorial control. But both of those artists, I think, knew that I wasn't interested in their private lives. I'm interested in the music they produced. If their private lives comes into that in some way, then fine. But it doesn't really often. We had David's girlfriends in there, etc. And, there was some mention of, I don't know what he'd been like. And, we saw him in various guises, but I wasn't going to go into, what happened with his girlfriends. That's not something I was interested in. And I think some people would have liked a bit more of that. But I've just made a radio documentary, actually, that goes out on Saturday the 14th on the BBC, which is about Bowie's time in Berlin, which is something I hadn't ever covered because it was sort of mythological and there was no film. So I thought, okay, well, I'll do this as a radio thing. And we interviewed 3 women who knew David in Berlin at that time, knew him intimately. But again, I don't go into that side of it. I go into how he and they explored Berlin as a city, its history, its culture, and how that affected his songwriting, rather than, the ins and outs of their relationship, which just doesn't interest me.
Well, then you answered my next question because here in the US, and I don't know if this channel is even available in the UK, there's a channel called Reels TV, and they put out that they never shine a light on artists in a positive way. It's basically trash TV. It's to
Yeah.
dig up the dirt, to dig up the the what ifs, or did this really happen, and then they make it come across as truthful, and the fans of any of the artists hate it because
Yeah.
all they want to do is create a so-called 1 hour documentary
Yeah.
on the bad times, the court cases, the arrest,
Yeah.
the list goes on and on and on. And
Yeah.
so you answer my question, and I like your approach with your subject. And because it does come down to trust in this day and age, if you even brought up the dark times and the failures, you're going to get a letter from the lawyer.
Yeah. Yeah. And it doesn't interest me. But on the other side, I don't want to make hagiography. I don't want to say that, David Bowie was the greatest. And I think the world has also gone the other way. And I think since David Bowie, and I just use him as an example, but he's become a sort of mythological icon who never did anything wrong. And anything that was slightly contentious seems to have been airbrushed. And I think why he liked that film that I made was because we didn't do that. And we had his drummer, Dennis Davis, talking about how he was off his head. And, you couldn't understand him. And we had someone else saying, who in the world would go on one of those big American TV shows coked out of your head? Who would do that?
Well,
But, nowadays, I'm not sure you would be allowed to say that because it would be regarded as somehow staining the brand.
okay. Well, let me give you an example. In modern day, how would you approach a documentary if George Michael was the subject matter? Because we all know the good, and we all know the bad, and we all know the questionable. How would you
Mhm.
approach a subject like that?
I think where his art and his private life collided, then you would go into that because he would discuss that, and he did that video. And I'm forgive me, I can't remember the video where he dress up as a policeman in a toilet, in a public
Yes.
toilet.
Yeah.
Okay, so he was mocking what had happened, and he was very, very good at that. But that's a part of his life. I think what's so extraordinary about George Michael is, and I'm not really a huge fan. I love Listen Without Prejudice. I love that album, but I'm not really a huge George Michael fan. But he is a genius. Everyone said it, and there's a clip of him in a studio, and you've got Elton John and Sting and all these people. I seem to remember who are watching him, and they're all sort of open mouthed how incredibly talented he was. And I'd want to concentrate on that because that's why we're interested in him. We're not interested in him because he made a mistake.
Yeah,
We all make mistakes all the time.
yeah, and you're right, because I have interviewed his manager before, and we talked
Simon
about
Maker,
everything.
didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah, and so, but the thing that put me in awe is, like you said, his musical genius in the studio is beyond compare.
Yeah.
But he only wrote his songs as long as he was sitting in the car or he was driving around. That's how he got his inspirations. So when
Yeah.
he was committed to house arrest, he never wrote because
No.
he couldn't write in that element unless he walked outside and got in
Yeah.
his car that parked in the driveway. That would be the only time he would be able to write. And a lot of
Yeah.
people don't know that.
Yeah. Which is fascinating. Yeah.
So
So
that would be
things
an
like
amazing,
that.
yeah, it'd be an amazing documentary.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
for
I think,
you, oh no, go ahead,
yeah.
Francis.
No, it's just, I think, we've sort of touched on it that it's now much, much more difficult with all these artists, even the heritage artists, because of social media and because of the branding. So, I thought it was very brave of Robbie Williams to do that series, which was warts and all, and showed him in bed and walking around in his underpants and talking about his breakdown. And I think that was very brave and kind of amazing. But I don't think we're going to get that from many, many artists.
Yeah, let me ask you this one, because there are artists that fans never want to see put in a negative light.
Yeah.
Do you think of the fans of an artist that you are doing a documentary on, or do you just tell the story and let the fans decide for themselves because, and I like to use this as an example. Elvis's fans are crazy, but I guess the correct word would be very passionate.
Yeah.
They don't like seeing one negative light on Elvis at all, which is why the movie Priscilla failed.
Yeah. Yeah.
And how do you approach that? I mean, do you think of the fans, or do you just focus on the subject knowing that the documentary that you're doing is not really going to tick off the fans at all?
I don't think of the fans. I don't think of the artist. I don't think of that side of it. I think, what is the truest story I can tell about this person? And I don't want to tread on anyone's toes. I don't want to do anything salacious. I don't want to upset anyone. My films are basically celebrations, but at the same time, I'm not making a film for Dolly Parton or Billie Eilish. I'm making it for an audience, but I can't be that audience. I can only be myself. So if it interests me, I hope that what interests me will interest them. If I present it if my storytelling is good enough, then I will be able to relay that fascination, that passion to the audience. Because, anyone who says they understand the audience are lying. Anyone who says that they understand the artists are lying. It's just not the case. All we can do is speak for ourselves and try and make something that is just and balanced and, yes, celebratory, while at the same time not just sort of airbrushing the life and not airbrushing, the failures.
For you, though, what is the difference in doing a documentary about a person who has passed away versus one that is still alive?
I think the rules are the same. I don't think I want to, say, okay, this guy, or this artist has passed away, so now we can say what we couldn't say when they were alive. I don't think so. I don't think that's right. I think we have to then be respectful to their memory and respectful for the people who are still around, their families, but at the same time, again, you can't just whitewash these people.
Yeah.
You still have to tell the truth. And, if it's a David Bowie album, then to say that his Tin Machine albums were rubbish, I think is fine, because they were, and I think he'd accept that, There's a wonderful scene in one of my films where he goes into this gas station in America and he sees there were little cassette tapes in those days, and he said, "Oh, well, look at what we've got. We've got a Tin Machine and we've got Lodger. They're my albums that no one ever wanted to buy." And that was humor. And I think that's fine. I think we've got to have humor. We've got to see ourselves and not be too pompous about it. I think there's a lot of pomposity in the music world and, the TV world. And it's just, come on, get real.
Well, yeah, it's funny you bring that up, because I've lost count how many recording artists that I've interviewed. And to compare them to all of the filmmakers or even actors that I've interviewed, there is a little bit more, I don't want to use the word pompous, but it's kind of close. I find more of that in music than I do in film.
I find it more with English performers than American. So if I get an American gig, it's wonderful, because that the Americans are going to give. They're going to give good sound bites all the time, and they're going to enjoy the process, and they know what they're there for, and they're just going to give 100%, except for Lou Reed. But let's forget Lou Reed. But, an amazing artist. I love his work. And I kind of sort of admired the way he was. But yeah, it wasn't an easy interview. But, when I did the Soul series, and we interviewed Lamont Dozier and Etta James and Fontella Bass and, the Holland brothers. I mean, it was just amazing. Every single one of them was a delight. And then we made a series called 7 Ages of Rock, and it was a sort of about white, British, rather po-faced, very serious, arty artists. And it was a different experience, is all I'm going to say.
Well,
it's a joy to work in America.
Yeah. Well, Yeah, I'm still trying to figure that out on my end because I love talking to all of the people in the UK, especially on the film side, and
Hmm.
because everybody is just so great to talk to when it comes to film. But which documentary was the most fun for you, and which one was the most challenging for you?
The most fun is a film that hasn't come out yet, but it's about country music, and it starts with Jelly Roll. I made it about just over a year ago, and it's actually opening the Nashville Film Festival next week. But it was a Tribeca, and so it's doing a few festivals at the moment. Um, and it starts with Jelly Roll, and it's got Lainey Wilson, and it's got Blanco Brown, who's one of your local man in Atlanta, who's just these fantastic, diverse artists: Lindsay L, Brooke Eden, and then we've got some of the older artists like Emmylou Harris, etc., is in there as well. But it was just so nice to film and work in Nashville with those Southern artists. They were so welcoming, gracious, bright. And some of them are really, really big stars now. Lainey Wilson has become stratospheric, hasn't she? And the same with Jelly Roll.
Oh yeah,
But they were
yeah.
so down to earth, and it was just a joy. It was a joy, and we filmed in this prison. We filmed in the prison that Jelly Roll had been incarcerated in, and we were allowed back, and we did a concert in there to the inmates, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. Yeah,
You
I
know,
don't want to be too negative about my worst. I can't really think. They
well,
all
I
have their
said
challenges.
most challenging.
Most challenging. Most challenging was the documentary with Hillary Clinton. Actually, not because of her and not because of any of the people in the film, but the material made me realize that I was never cut out to be a current affairs producer. I couldn't watch that kind of horror. There was a scene that we had of the Taliban executing these two women in a in an arena that the Americans had built for sport, actually, and it had been turned into this sort of killing field. And I saw it once and just had to sort of walk out of the room. I feel it even now, but I had to watch it repeatedly in the edit, and I just thought, okay, I can never do this again. I just can't. However important the subject was, I'm just not personally equipped to deal with that.
Yeah,
But I
I
was
know
very
what you
proud of
mean.
it.
Yeah, I know what you mean because I watch so much film
Yeah,
and I watch a ton of short films.
yeah. Hmm.
And, short films get to the point. And sometimes the content of a short film can be very hard to watch,
Yeah.
very hard to swallow, and may leave you with a lasting impression that a feature film will never have.
No, that's right.
And but it just comes with the territory. But no, I know exactly what you mean. And I want to
Yeah,
kind of go back on to this new film, Rebel Country,
yeah.
because I read the log line for Rebel Country. And
Oh,
you
what did it
covered,
say? 'Cause I haven't read it.
well, it says that it, navigates some very heavy topics of race, class, poverty, gender, sexuality,
Yeah,
artistic expression in Nashville's music scene. Was
yeah.
this documentary to show the changes that country music is going through?
Yes, it's to show the changes, and it'll be interesting. And I'm really sad that I can't be in Nashville next weekend. I mean, it's next, I think Wednesday. It's opening the festival because it went down well in New York. It would go down well in London. I think it'll have its detractors in the South, maybe. I think those people who say, I don't want my country music, meddled with. It's fine as it is, and we don't want these newer artists who are expressing new ideas, coming in, and that's what the film is about. And it's looking at how country music at its best reflects the country of America. And for lots of reasons, it hasn't for a very long time. And there's a extraordinary statistic that between, I'm going to get it wrong now because it's a while since I made that film, but something like between 1920 and 2020, there are 5 African American artists who have made any indent on the country scene. And that, as a Brit, or anyone really, seems absolutely shocking and appalling, and it's something that needs to be addressed.
Well, I will say this. I've had the opportunity to interview some black country artists. One of them, he and I got into the conversation and really got down to the nitty gritty about
Yeah,
black artists and country. And he said, "You ever been to a black rodeo?" And I said, "No." He said, "Do you realize that there's no country music to play at a black rodeo?" He said, "They're either going to be playing blues, jazz, or rap
yeah,
at a black rodeo." And so here we're looking at a 100-year span. And if you asked any white person, name a black artist in country music, every single one of them will say Charlie Pride, and they'll never remember
exactly.
the other four.
They won't remember them, no. No.
And and then of course this year you get Beyonce stepping into country,
Yeah,
and everybody was mad as hell.
yeah,
And I get what one side. I mean, I understand one side of it, and I understand the other side of it because I've interviewed both sides. And I had a black country artist tell me he was on stage one night and singing the songs, and there was this black woman in the crowd standing right in front of him, and she's shaking her head no. And then after I guess he had finished his set, she told him, "You need to go back to another genre." And I was like, "But she's
oh,
black and she's there watching you, and she tells you not to be in country." So the whole system's messed up.
the whole system is completely messed up. But I mean, people have to watch my film, because I think Breland, Blanco Brown, and the various other artists in my film who express it very eloquently as to why black people, Mexican people, people from all sorts of different backgrounds, different sexualities, different races, different cultures, different religions should be invited into country music. It makes sense. It makes absolute sense, and I think it's an abomination in this day and age. But I am, that's why I say I'm slightly concerned that if I had gone to Nashville, there would be people who would say, "What are you doing?" And I think that was a really fun film to make, actually.
I bet it was because and not we think about, like you had said, and you bring up a very vital point, because now I'm thinking, okay, the other one I can remember is Neil McCoy.
Yeah,
What's the other one? Cowboy. What's his name? I can't even think of it. But so there's like five in the last 100 years.
yeah,
Now, if you think of Hispanic country artists and country music, I can only name two: Johnny
yeah,
Rodriguez and Freddie
exactly,
Perry.
exactly
Same
that.
thing.
Yeah, it's the same thing. So we've got this wonderful artist called Frank Ray, Mexican artist, and he's just exceptional. And he does a song in my film called "A Different Kind of Country," and it's just wonderful, saying we're country too. And my film looks at how a lot of the tropes of country music actually came from Mexico, etc. So yeah, so that was a really fun thing to do, but it was challenging because you are going against an orthodoxy, and there are people who don't want you to make that film, and there are artists who don't want that film to be seen.
Wow.
You know,
Yeah, I personally cannot wait to see it. And I know that the Nashville Film Festival is an Oscar qualifying film festival. So good luck to Rebel Country there.
thank,
Um,
thank you.
and really, I filmed in Nashville for 3 years. I have a lot of country recording artists who still live there. We've become very good friends,
Yeah,
and and in a way they're the same way. They're like, we need to have grown, especially in
yeah,
the last 20 years, farther than we are right now.
Yeah. I
And
think everyone recognizes that. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's so your documentary is so timely. But you're right. You go to Nashville and the people, I mean, they're ready to talk and
Yeah.
they'll tell you stories that never end.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I mean, I could spend, I mean, Lainey Wilson, you could listen to Lainey Wilson's voice for 1,000 years. And Jelly Roll stories you could listen to for 1,000 years, let alone the rest of them. You know, Lindsay L, all these other fantastic artists. Yeah.
Yeah, now for you, what has been your greatest single moment working on so many documentaries showcasing some of the most influential people of our time?
I loved filming with Billie Eilish at Glastonbury. That was a highlight. I filmed her when she first came to Glastonbury, and we she really didn't know what Glastonbury was, and there's no reason why she should. She didn't know how big it was, and so we got her up on there's a sort of hill which is near Glastonbury with an ancient tower on it, and it's part of these ley lines, and it's very mystical and all the rest of it. And people believe that, I don't know, Christ went there with Joseph of Arimathea, and there are all these myths swirling around. And we got her up there, and she was sort of looking over the landscape, and we got her to say, "Fuck, is that Glastonbury? What, this empty shit over there?" were her words of these fields. And then she sort of drove nearer and nearer, and she saw that it wasn't just some empty shit of some fields. You know, it was the biggest festival in the world, and blah 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 blah. And we filmed her going on stage, and this was before the pandemic, and she was wearing this wonderful mask. You know, no one wore masks really, except maybe in Japan or China or something. But yeah, and she was wearing this mask, and just watching her perform on stage with her mum on that stage at Glastonbury was exceptional. And then the next time she came, she was headlining at Glastonbury, which was, I don't know, whatever it was, 3 years later. And she had grown so much as an artist and as a human being. And yeah, and it was just wonderful. She seemed, I mean, I've only sort of met her 3 times, but she seemed a wonderful and authentic person. She did. And she wasn't surrounded by quite so many people as some of the other artists. And she's just a very, very, very bright young woman.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I laugh because when I hear people say, well, Taylor Swift has won this many awards and Beyonce's won this many awards, and the list goes on, and I sit there and I go, so what? Billie Eilish is not even 25 years old and she has 2 Oscars. What do you got?
Yeah, exactly. But Beyonce and Taylor Swift are both also exceptional. I mean,
Oh,
they're
sure,
there for a
sure.
reason. They're there for a reason. But yeah, Billie has sort of taken her own path, and it's maybe a little bit, you know, just a rougher path. And that's why maybe she won't ever be as big as Taylor Swift. But I hope she is, because she speaks my language.
Yeah, I mean, it is so funny how people, I should say fans and the general public, place people in certain categories.
Yeah.
And I don't care how many, to me, if someone says they want a Grammy, I'm just like, so what?
Yeah.
If you win an Oscar, hey, more power to you because that's a lot harder to get.
Yeah.
Just like the other day when I had interviewed the Palme d'Or winner
Yeah.
from Cannes Film Festival, I told him, I said, you know what? That's a lot harder and a lot rarer than an Oscar
Yeah. Yeah.
because there's only 2 winners per year.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly. No, that's quite something special. Yeah.
Very much so. Now, I have to ask you because you really, when I looked at your resume, you're really like the king of documentaries.
I don't. I think the idea of that to anyone who knows me would be absolutely ridiculous. But I'm going to take the compliment. You know.
Well, I'm sure that they may let you borrow the Duke's crown to wear that from every now and then. But uh,
Yeah.
with film documentaries of any kind, especially here in America, We have always found them on channels like Access TV or MTV or VH1, maybe the History Channel.
Yeah.
But now that we have streaming, and I know like Paramount shows many music documentaries,
Mhm.
has the explosion of streaming been a positive thing for documentary filmmakers like yourself?
Um, I don't think so. No. I
Really?
no. I think what Netflix has done, and by extension, Apple and Amazon and Paramount and all the rest, they've raised the bar of all television. They've made everything better. You know, I think where the problem lies is that they they insist on certain artists. So, for example, a colleague of mine was trying to get a documentary about the singer Ray, Raye, who's huge in Britain. And people are saying she's not big enough. And you kind of go, no, she is. She's absolutely big enough. She's going to be absolutely massive. But I don't think there's that investment that something like the BBC had and some of the smaller American channels in those younger artists who haven't quite made it but are already exceptional. And I think if we have a world where we only celebrate those heritage artists like Bruce Springsteen or Elton John, who both were at the Toronto Film Festival for latest films about them, or we can only celebrate another film on the Rolling Stones or Taylor Swift or whatever it is, excuse me,
Hmm?
then we're missing out on all those younger artists who will be the artists of the future. And we won't have the record of them that we do of so many others.
Yeah, and see, this is a thing that happened to me early on when I started doing interviews with recording artists, especially legends.
Yeah.
Because, and it's like you do these documentaries, and what we've done is we have documented their legacy.
Yeah.
And with younger artists, I think it's important to start showcasing them now,
Yeah.
because what if they become the next Beyonce or Taylor
Yeah.
Swift or Adele? You have that early footage to tell that story 20 years down the road, because that is going to be archived footage that
Yeah.
we would not have.
Now they'll say, the artist will say, well, Ray will say, well, I've got a team who are filming me the whole time. Jelly Roll had a team that they're filming him the whole time as well. But somehow that sort of footage is then filleted and edited by someone who's desperate to make sure that their particular artist looks good. And it's not just that we want. We want them making mistakes. We want them in the studio mucking up. We want them, hitting a wrong note and so forth. And we want to have someone from the outside, not just the inside, recording this stuff.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, I have done numerous interviews with people who personally knew Elvis, lived with Elvis, toured with Elvis. I mean, like firsthand accounts, none of this hangers on stuff.
Yeah.
And back in the day when somebody did have a video camera, or they had a movie camera that they were using to document footage, it's
Yeah.
the fans that appreciate that stuff. Yeah,
Yeah.
there may be something that could be questionable, but that was life back in the day. And
Yeah.
I'm like you, I'm already tired of the highly polished,
Yeah.
edited
Yeah.
footage of today. It's funny because if I'm watching a documentary on television, a lot of people need to realize what's the difference between a true documentary versus
Yeah.
a 30-minute or 1 hour hit piece or clickbait piece that's just slapped together to fill up airtime.
Yeah. Yeah. And the fact that now on the Beyonce documentary, the Taylor Swift, you see their names. You see that they're the executive producer on their own film. So how are we going to get any sort of real editorial integrity out of that? You're just not. It's a branding exercise. And I think so the streamers have done a huge amount and improved all of our lives in many, many ways. But they've also sort of evened it all out. And the BBC used to make films about a rare vole, which is a sort of small mouse in Epping Forest, and that was interesting. Now it has to be about lions and tigers and sharks and whales, and it's the same thing. And now it also has to be about the big five in the music industry, and we're missing a huge amount from that, and we're also missing the sort of social context of these artists. But and I hope it's just a phase.
Well, you bring up a vital point, because with some upcoming new artist, if there was a high quality documentary done about them, and even though they may not be globally known at that moment, a documentary can make them so.
Yeah. Yeah. But where would you get the funding for it? I just don't think that's also the commissioners, the controllers, they're using their algorithms, and their algorithms are telling them that the audience won't watch this. So they're not interested in slow burns. They're not interested in something now that might be big in 5 years. They want the hit now.
That also happens with some people in our industry that are legends.
Yep.
That can't even get a book published or even a documentary done, because the higher ups are going, who's going to watch that? And I'm like, do you realize that you wouldn't be here? You wouldn't have the job that you have if it wasn't for that person. Being a pioneer in television or film. Yeah, what they've accomplished matters, because if the general public will see it, they're going to go, oh, that's how that happened.
Yeah. But
we
maybe
that.
We do, but maybe, I remember, and I'm trying to sort of get away from this. There was a man called John. I'm not going to give you his surname, but he was called John when I joined the BBC. And he said, oh, Francis, you should have been here, 20 years ago. It was so good then. Everything was amazing. And I thought it was pretty amazing then. And for me, it was. And I think there's a tendency for my generation to sort of say, oh, well, it's gone to, it's gone to ruin. It's not like it used to be. And it's not. And it's different. But I don't hear the younger generation complaining. They love it. They love TikTok. They love, Chicken Shop Date. Do you have Chicken Shop Date?
I have no idea what that is.
Look up Chicken Shop Date. I can't remember the name of her, but she's this sort of just amazing interviewer. She's quite sort of posh, and she meets rappers and other people in this chicken shops, wherever they are. And she just gets more out of them than I could ever do. And it's just great. And it's a sort of viral sensation. And, that's how people like it. They like it in short form, and they like it in that. So I don't want to be sort of, Dr. Gloom and sort of say, it used to be better. It's just different, I guess.
Yeah, it is. Now, for you, is there a particular person that you have not done a documentary on that you would absolutely love to do one about?
I would have loved to have done the Sinead O'Connor documentary, but the person who did it, the director who did it, did such an amazing job that it can't really be bettered. But I would have loved. I mean, she's such a fascinating woman, Sinead O'Connor, and she sort of proved the world right on so many things that, besides her angelic voice. So PJ Harvey, I would love. The Cure, I would love. I'm a huge Cure fan. And, Robert Smith knows I want it, but I think someone else might be making that, which is a shame, but that would be something I would love. Yeah, no, there are still lots of subjects waiting, but whether I'll get them, I don't know.
Well, since you already have Rebel Country out, now I know that it's not available to the public just yet because it's in the film festival circuit. Can you tell us possibly what your next documentary project is going to be about?
No.
Yeah, I know how that goes.
I'm trying to get something off the ground, and I don't want to jinx it. But yeah, it's also it is, it is a much more challenging environment now than it was. It
Yeah.
really is, you know. And I think you asked me about the streamers, but I think the streamers have had an effect on the BBC as well. And the BBC is trying to be like the streamers. And instead of wanting to be distinctive, it wants to do the stuff the streamers do, but they've got bottomless pockets. And the BBC just doesn't. And so I think it's falling between two stools. And I think it should go down a distinctive route, which is proper public service broadcasting like PBS. But it's got enough money to still keep going and do those things it used to be so good at, rather than trying to be something it can't ever be, because it just hasn't got Netflix's money.
Yeah. Yeah. When people bring up, Netflix's money and others, I'm like, well, try balancing that out with the massive debt that they're dealing with at the same time that they try to ignore.
No. Yeah, they try to ignore, but but slowly I think that debt's going down, and they'll have, Netflix will be, it'll be the world's broadcaster. It will be the world's broadcaster, and they've had a business plan and they've waited it out, and they've done an amazing job.
Yeah, and I'm like you, where the BBC can still separate themselves from the pack and bring some of the highest quality, beautiful
Yeah,
documentaries, and I think that needs to be focused on more because I am so tired of things that are slapped together. They come across as clickbait, and they're only there to bait a television viewer who is flipping through 600
yeah,
channels trying to find something to watch.
exactly right, exactly right. So yeah, how can we get some sensation into this so they'll stay with our channel for more than 3 minutes? Yeah.
Yeah, that's it. Well, Francis, I want to thank you so much
Well,
for
I've really
sharing
enjoyed
some
it.
of your films and your behind the scenes insights with us today.
Thank you for having me. I've really, really enjoyed the time we've had together.
Well, thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, hey, I want to thank you for watching. And as for me, I'll either see you at the movies or from the red carpet.